About 7 years ago, I was temporarily homeless and stuck in Sierra Vista, Arizona, which is a little town 15 minutes from the Mexican border. A streak of misfortune had knocked me on my ass, and I'd been drifting around for about a month. I'll be transparent, I did have some addiction problems with alcohol back then, but I've never touched anything else. I hadn't had a drink in weeks when this happened, so it has nothing to do with what I saw. Also, my homeless situation was not the usual story where substance abuse or mental illness caused it. Things just fell apart for me all at once. Everything in my life that I cared about was gone in about a 6-month period, including my job, my house, and my wife of 11 years who left me to be with somebody else. It took me 4 months to get off the street, but I pulled myself out and I've been sober for over 6 years. That's enough about me though, I'll get on to what happened. During my time in Sierra Vista, the daily routine was to stay awake through the night until sunrise because the nights were cold and staying active kept me warm. Then when the first rays of sunlight would hit, I could get warm enough to sleep. I would usually sleep for a few hours in the morning before I was back up and hitting the local charity for lunch. Then I would kind of catnap until dinner, find something else to eat, and wander around the desert to stay warm again until sunrise. That was my cycle, rinse and repeat. I really stayed within 2 main areas, in town and north of town in the desert past Highway 90. In the daytime, I would be in town for food and supplies and the occasional handout if someone was feeling generous. Nights were different though, and I wanted some kind of weapon with me. I owned a short straight-edged sword that I would keep in my burrow during the day, but it was always on me when I'd wander around at night. It wasn't a cheap novelty sword. I had bought it years earlier when I had money and a job, and I used to keep it in our bedroom for protection. When I'd walk through the desert at night, I would very often be far enough out to where I couldn't see the lights from town, and I felt so much safer having something with me to defend myself just in case, even though I'd only ever used it to carve up yucca stalks for the roof of my burrow. On one of these nights when I was out alone, I had been following the edge of a small wash and using a 5-foot stick I found as a walking stick. I'm sure I'd been walking for over an hour, so I was probably a mile or 2 from anyone else. Out of nowhere, I just about jumped out of my skin because I heard something above me that sounded like a parachute opening and cutting through the air, almost like someone had jumped out of a plane and opened their chute right over where I was walking. I remember crouching down into the brush just as a reflex and looking up, but it was so dark I couldn't see anyone. I could still hear it over me though, and it sounded about as fast as a car going by as it made its way to the ground. It made sense that it was a parachute because it sounded exactly like that burst when they first open up. I was shocked again when I heard a second one. This was identical to the first one and it opened loudly, then it flew past me and I'm guessing came down somewhere. I'm positive I could hear them floating through the air, but it was so dark that I had no idea where they landed. It made me start to wonder if there was training going on or these were soldiers doing night jumps or even special forces or border patrol. I could be wrong, but it sounded like the chutes were being pulled only a few hundred feet above the ground, which didn't seem right because that's very low. I also didn't want to unknowingly be in some kind of off-limits military area, so I stopped walking. I would say I have a good level of street smarts and I can just tell when something isn't right. I felt that feeling and decided to turn around and go back the way I came. In my gut, I didn't have a good feeling about being there. After backtracking for probably 10 minutes, I started to hear movement around me. I know I was already on edge, but I can promise you there was actually something moving through the bushes. It was just too dark to see what it was. By this time, I was just trying to stay calm. In my head, I kept picturing soldiers around me because of the parachute sounds, but I was also in the middle of the southwestern desert and knew better than to roll up on something dangerous like a mother javelina or a bear, so I wanted to make my presence known to whatever was out there. I took my walking stick and started smacking it against the trunk of a bush next to me. That made these sounds I was hearing stop instantly. My anxiety was through the roof because it got dead quiet. Then when I was doing a 360 to look around for anything, I saw the silhouette of someone standing behind a bush about 50 feet away from me. I never saw this person stand up, they were just there when I turned my head. I've been in my share of dangerous situations and have felt pretty high levels of fear, but nothing even close to this. My body went stone cold and I felt like I was in a standoff. Then whoever this was started walking toward me. I did what anyone would do in that position and got ready to defend myself. I grabbed the handle of my sword and yanked it. Unfortunately, because my adrenaline was so high, I pulled it way too hard and at an odd angle, and the strap broke so the sheath didn't come off. There I was, essentially brandishing a plastic sword and waiting to be attacked by some psycho in the desert. At maybe 25 feet away, I finally got a full view of this person. Don't judge me when you hear this, but it did not look like a human being. It had huge, glassy black eyes and it looked reptilian. I swore I could even see scaly skin. I honestly had no words for what I was seeing. I thought I was going to die right there where I was standing, so I pulled the sheath off my sword and held it up in the air as high as I could while belting out the lowest, loudest sound my body could make. Whatever this was jolted like a startled animal, then it took off at Usain Bolt speeds. I kept shouting as loud as I could and watched it run away from me through the brush and dirt. The combination of fear and relief that I felt was overwhelming. I thought that was going to be the end of me. I picked up my stick and finished the walk back with my sword out the whole time. When I got back to my burrow, I grabbed my pack and walked into town. I think I just needed to be in civilization for a while. I had some time to think on my walk, and I was trying so hard to accept what I'd just come face to face with. I could only come up with a couple of options for what I encountered. Rationally, I thought it could have been some form of military operation. Maybe they really were doing night jumps and the two sounds I heard were in fact the parachutes and two men. There's also a chance that they were wearing suits or gear that made the one I saw appear to be reptilian, but that still wouldn't explain the speed it went when it took off. Like I said, it ran as fast as an animal would. Another option was that I had seen something completely alien, and the sounds I heard were from a wildly different form of transportation. That would also mean that what I had been ready to fight actually looked reptilian, and that thought is horrifying to me. The day after this happened, when I was back in town, I walked around all day with a skip in my step, feeling so happy to have made it through this experience alive and safe. I really and truly think it gave me a boost to take control of my life and get on my feet again. I talked my buddy's ear off about it while we had fried chicken and mashed potatoes at the Salvation Army that night, and I remember having such a huge sense of gratitude, even though I barely had $1 to my name. This experience changed me, and I don't know why, but as scary as it was, in a lot of ways, I'm thankful I had such a terrifying and unbelievable experience. This might not qualify as a true alien encounter, but I think it could be, and it was the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me, so I wanted to share it. It was 8 years ago and in Ontario, Canada. At the time, a good friend and I were working together at the same restaurant, and the place was shutting down for 2 weeks so they could do a full kitchen renovation. We were still getting paid during the remodel, so instead of sitting around town and doing nothing, we decided to tackle a long paddling trip that we'd talked about for years. On day 1 of our time off, we packed up my friend's Subaru, strapped the canoe on top, and left. Our trip was going to be a 10-day paddle in Quetico Provincial Park in Ontario. For anyone who doesn't know this area, which is probably most people, Quetico is basically the Canadian side of the Boundary Waters in northeastern Minnesota. It's extremely remote, and because we were up there really late in the year, it felt even more isolated. It was cold, quiet, and empty. For the first 5 days, we didn't see a single person. Not one canoe on the water and not even another voice outside of our own. It was honestly starting to feel like we were the only people left in the world, which is exactly what we wanted. It was on the night of day 5 when we first noticed something out of the ordinary. We were in our tent and I was almost asleep when I heard a huge echoing sound. I thought it was a dream until I turned over and opened my eyes. Then I realized it was real. It sounded like the impacts of huge rocks slamming together. There was a very rhythmic pattern to them, and they were heavy hits. My friend and I both sat up in the tent trying to figure out how close or far away it was because the echo was all over the place. This might sound weird, but it sounded like they were coming from 2 different locations and were answering each other. We would hear the sound coming from one direction, then the next time would be from the other direction. This went on for a long time, and we both agreed it was way too deliberate to be natural. We were also sure it wasn't other people out there paddling or camping because it was just too big. Heavy machinery or explosives from a huge construction site might be close to what we heard, but no single person or small group could make sounds that large or at that level. I want to say we heard this going sporadically for about an hour, but I wasn't paying attention to the time. It could have been half of that and just felt longer to me. We had no idea what was causing it and couldn't do anything about it, so when it finally stopped, we tried to get a few hours of sleep. The next day, everything was quiet again. After breakfast, we packed up and took off. We paddled most of the 6th day, but stopped earlier than usual since neither of us had gotten much sleep the night before. With the extra time, we set up camp and did a little fishing that evening, then sat by the fire for a while and made dinner. Around 9 o'clock, right after we had finished eating and were getting ready to turn in, we heard branches snapping somewhere toward the water but very close to our camp. Of course, there are animals everywhere out there, so it wasn't a big surprise. Plus, we each had a can of bear spray ready at all times. A few more minutes went by and I got up to use the woods one more time before getting in the tent. I was standing at the edge of where the trees started and got the single biggest scare of my life. I saw 2 white eyes reflecting the light from our campfire, and they were right in front of me. My body completely froze and I loudly asked, "Who's there?" As soon as those words left my mouth, a man replied something, but I didn't catch what he said. Then he walked out of the woods and right into our camp. I can't even begin to tell you how startling and unreal this was to see. We were in the middle of the Canadian wilderness with 6 days of paddling behind us, and this guy just strolls out of the trees at night and into our camp. When he got closer to the fire, we could see him clearly, and he had very striking and unique facial features. Honestly, he was a very good-looking, fit guy that looked like he could have been from somewhere in northern Africa. He also had the hint of an accent that backed that up. The strangest part about him, though, was his clothing. All he was wearing was a black starter jacket, blue jeans, and tennis shoes. No backpack, no flashlight, and no gear. He literally had nothing. He was so out of place for where we were and how cold it was. He had to know we were extremely uncomfortable seeing him show up like that. He smiled right away and said he had a camp spot right down the hill from us, and I guess he had walked over because our dinner smelled good. We didn't know a thing about this guy, and I wanted to keep things as cool and calm as possible because you never know, so I told him we had some extra food if he was hungry. I was mostly trying to be nice, but he surprisingly said he was very hungry, and we ended up giving him a Ziploc bag with granola bars and trail mix and a few other things in it. We thought he was going to take it back to his camp, but he actually sat down right there in front of our fire and started eating. I want to pause for just a quick second to bring up how crazy this situation was. I kept making eye contact with my friend like, what are we supposed to do here? I didn't know if I should grab my bear spray and tell him it was time to leave or continue to keep things relaxed by being nice to him. It was unbelievably awkward and tense. Thank God the guy started talking to us while he was eating, which actually made me feel a little better. It turned out he was a really nice guy and he didn't seem threatening at all. The whole time he talked, he had this kind of comforting stillness to him, like he'd known us for years. We mostly talked about the park and our trip, but he wasn't being sketchy or looking at our gear or anything like that. He just sat there eating and talked to us like any friend would do. Nothing during our conversation threw up any red flags until the very end when he asked us where Highway 1 was. He said he was looking for it and needed to get there. Highway 1 isn't even in Canada. It's down in the States and goes through Minnesota. We were easily 4 hours north of that. I remember pointing to the south and I told him how far off he was, but he didn't seem at all bothered by it. Before he left, he thanked us more than once for the food. Then he turned to the south where I had just pointed and started walking away. There was no hesitation even. He just walked into the woods like he was going to wing it. But right before he left our camp, he turned around and said, "Keep an eye out for my twin brother. He's walking around here too and you might see him." Then this guy literally walked into the darkness. My friend and I stared at each other, not saying a word. I don't think either one of us wanted to talk until we knew he was actually gone. After a painful amount of time, I finally said something and asked what in the world he meant by his twin brother was walking around. We couldn't believe what had just happened, and it felt like the guy had wandered in from another dimension. Also, we couldn't ignore the fact that he didn't go back to this camp he said he came from down the hill. He walked off in the opposite direction with nothing. Let me tell you, we got a grand total of 0 hours of sleep that night, and we both slept with our bear spray in hand. Every single noise sounded like footsteps, and every gust of wind had us convinced we were hearing voices. Nothing ended up happening though, and we never saw him again or his twin brother. At the first hint of sunrise, we packed up and left. I don't even remember talking that morning until we were back on the water. We just wanted to wrap up the trip, which we did early by cutting out the last 2 days. I don't think we were able to take a deep breath until we were actually in the car driving home. I'll say it again, this might not seem like an alien encounter to most people, but I'm not so sure. The sounds we heard the night before our encounter with that guy were so unnatural. To me, it sounded like something slamming into the earth or even landing, and I can't even get into how I feel about that guy. The simple fact that he was out there alone is insane. I would encourage anyone to pull that area up on a map and tell me why or how he was there, especially dressed the way he was so late in the year. If there was ever an alien wandering around and trying to pass itself off as human, it would be him. And what was with the twin brother he mentioned? Was it another alien he was traveling with and they looked exactly the same? I have so many questions. The whole trip seems like one big creepy memory to me now, and I really have to stop myself when I start thinking about it too much. My story happened in Ottawa, Illinois. I have a mini Australian Shepherd named Storm with bright blue eyes, and he's basically my shadow. The only time he isn't with me is when I'm at work. Other than that, he goes everywhere I go. Every day when I get home from work, light or dark, rain or shine, we go for a walk because he's stuck inside all day. I rotate between a few routes, but one of them is an area called Dayton Bluffs, which is a nature preserve 10 minutes from my house, and that was where we went on this particular night. It was also in November, and since I get out of work at 5, it was almost dark when we got out there, so I had a headlamp and a flashlight with me. Our walk started just like every other day, with Storm excited and tugging on the leash with his tail wagging. I'm going to say we only walked for about 15 minutes before I saw something on the trail ahead of us. It looked exactly like bright headlights shining in our direction, but no cars can get out to the trails out there. The only thing I could come up with was that it had to be a maintenance vehicle for the preserve or some kind of trail work going on, since that's what it looked like. As we kept walking, I noticed the lights seemed very low on the ground and angled in a more upward direction into the trees. My idea of trail work sounded right, but something else wasn't making sense. We kept walking toward it, but didn't seem to be getting any closer. The lights had to be moving with us because they stayed exactly the same distance away, like they were just ahead, but we couldn't actually get to them. I wasn't feeling afraid of anything at that point. It was actually the opposite. I kind of wanted to hurry up and get there so we could see what was going on. We got to a section of the trail that goes up a very small incline, then drops down a hill, and I was sure we'd be able to finally see what the lights were for. This is when something happened to me that was unlike anything I've ever felt. I got a strong physical sensation that felt like I was leaning into water. It was identical to standing waist deep in a lake, then leaning forward and letting the water hit your chest and head all at once, like a soft pressure that hits you in the front and then wraps all the way around you as you go underwater. The instant this feeling hit me, my attention locked onto the lights. Everything else around me went into the background. I wasn't thinking about Storm or what was happening to me. I just felt an overwhelming pull to go straight to the lights. It was a totally calm and almost happy feeling, and I remember thinking I was exactly where I was supposed to be at that moment. The next few seconds are a little hazy, but I know I kept moving forward. The only part that really stuck with me was the feeling in my feet. It felt like my toes were tapping against the ground, like I wasn't really walking on my own. It felt more like I was being held up and pulled forward, and my feet were just hanging there, lightly dragging along the trail. What's crazy is I still didn't care. The only thing I wanted to do was get to the lights. Nothing else really mattered. Somewhere during this, I started to hear what I thought were tiny bells. It sounded like very high-pitched small ones that were ringing over and over. They still didn't matter much to me because these lights had my undivided attention, but the ringing noise wouldn't stop and it was starting to irritate me. I know that sounds strange considering what was going on, but it was really annoying me. So much so that I remember saying, "Would you please shut up?" like I was asking them to stop. They just kept ringing though. Finally, out of frustration, I turned my head around to see where it was coming from, and that's when everything snapped back to me. The sound I was hearing wasn't tiny bells, it was Storm's collar and his metal name tag rattling. He was right next to me, whining and jumping up and clawing at my legs with his front paws. He was completely freaking out. In that moment where I was looking away from the lights and watching Storm, I had this out-of-body experience like I was stuck between two places. I'll try to describe it so it makes sense, but the front of me still wanted to go toward the lights and my whole body was leaning in that direction, while simultaneously behind me was the dark trail and my dog panicking like something horrible was happening. It honestly felt like I had a choice: keep moving forward or go back to Storm. My dog is everything to me and I treat him like the child I never had. Seeing him in that much distress was more than I could take, so I turned all the way around and crouched down with my arms out to grab him. The second he touched my hands, the lights were gone. They just disappeared like they were a figment of my imagination the whole time. The only light on the trail was coming from my headlamp. Storm was all over me, shaking and licking and whining nonstop. I held on to him because I needed a second to understand what had even happened. When I realized what I had been doing, walking straight toward this bright light that I wasn't even sure existed, I grabbed his leash and we got back on the trail at a jogging pace to get to the car. I don't think I looked behind me even once, we just left. While we were jogging to the car, weird ideas were running through my head. I kept wondering if I'd had a medical issue, like an aneurysm or a stroke. I really started to believe that I'd had a near-death experience and was trying to go toward the light. I even felt the pull that people talk about when you hear those stories. I didn't know how else to explain it. When we got to the car, I felt physically fine other than the adrenaline. I didn't have chest pains or a headache or dizziness, there was nothing. Storm and I just drove home and he didn't leave my side for the rest of the night. For the next couple of weeks, this was heavily on my mind. I went back and forth about seeing a doctor, but I didn't like the idea because I was afraid of getting bad news. At the same time, I also didn't want to ignore something serious like some kind of brain tumor, so I really didn't know what to do. During this period of worrying, I went to a small family dinner party for the holidays and told my cousin what happened. He and I are very close and I hadn't said a word about it to anyone else. I mostly just wanted his advice about getting myself checked out. He didn't even hesitate and told me it didn't sound medical, especially since I'm healthy and I was in my early 30s. Then he hit me with something way out there. I had been convinced that what happened was a near-death experience because of the bright light, but he said it sounded like I'd either been abducted and didn't remember, or almost abducted and Storm stepped in. Being calmly pulled toward a bright light with hazy memories matched other abduction stories he had heard. He also said that Storm couldn't have pulled me away from a near-death experience, and I thought that was a good point. I have never been into aliens or abductions, so to me it sounded a little outrageous. He ended up sending me links to other stories online though, and a couple of them were way too close for comfort. The pull I felt and the loss of control seemed to be a very common theme. Really, the only difference is I never saw any kind of craft or scary beings, it was only the bright lights. I've also been perfectly healthy ever since, no symptoms of anything that would make me think I had a medical event. The only thing that's changed is Storm doesn't like Dayton Bluffs anymore. He'll go out there during the day and be okay, but if we're there after sunset, he pulls all over the place and is not himself. Not that I would ever be going on a walk without him, but man am I thankful he was there with me that night. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies.